Hello and welcome to our series of webinars on elements of Microsoft Excel. My name is Laura Ralston and I co-hosted this session delivered by Louise Friel, who is one of our lead Microsoft Office trainers. This module covers calculations on Excel, and rather than you listen to the preamble, we have edited the start of the session so you're dropped right into Louise starting the delivery. If you would like the files Louise uses during this demonstration to allow you to practice, simply contact us by emailing inquiries@cosenza.co.uk and reference this video. So, over to Louise.
And hopefully now everybody can see my spreadsheet, which I have some examples on. Now I'm aware that in Zoom, and also depending on your internet connection, there is sometimes a little lag between what you see on the screen and what you're actually hearing from me, but fingers crossed everything will be okay. So if everybody can see the spreadsheet I'm working on at the moment, I have some little simple examples here to work through, and we're looking at calculations. So what we want to do is use our spreadsheet. We've recorded information and we want to use the spreadsheet then to answer some questions. We're not just recording this information for no particular reason. So as I'm sure you're all aware, anytime you type anything into a cell, whether it's text or a number, it goes in directly as it is. So text appears on the left, numbers appear on the right by default. But if we want to get Excel to perform a calculation, we need to precede with whatever we type with the equal sign. Now the equal sign, the plus sign, the minus sign, etc., they are all called operators. And I have just written a little list down below. The equal sign converts Excel into calculation mode. The plus sign is addition, minus sign is subtraction. The multiplication is a little star sign. Now, depending on your keypad, you might have on your keyboard, you might have a keypad on the right-hand side in which you've got your operators. Alternatively, Shift and 8 on your keyboard will get you the star. The division is the /, and then you've got this little additional one that people don't use very often, but that's Shift and 8. And that will raise to the power, so squared, cubed, and so on. We probably won't do that one today, but just to let you know what they are. Now, we're going to work out the standard pay for our salespeople. So we know how many hours they've worked, and we know what their standard rate is. So in cell D4, and we know we're in cell D4 because of the highlighted column letter and the row number, but also something that a lot of people aren't aware of. There's this thing called the name box up here in the top left-hand corner, and that tells me I'm in cell D4. Now we're sitting in cell D4, and I want to multiply the standard hours worked by the standard rate. So I precede it with the equal sign, and what I could do is I could say it's 10 because this person's worked 10 hours times 20 because they're getting £20 per hour, and that will tell me that they're getting £200 for that bit of work. But the problem there is if Jane does more than 10 hours, if she does 12 hours, for example, or if she gets £25 an hour, we can see that the calculation does not recalculate the standard pay. So just putting in the values is incorrect. And if you ever find yourself doing a calculation and you're typing in the values directly, stop and think, how can you do that more effectively? I'm just going to undo this. What we should be doing is picking up the cell that contains the value. So we're going to re-enter this formula, and we're going to say it's equal to the cell that contains the standard hours worked, which is D4, multiplied by the standard rate per hour, which is cell C4. Now I'm typing in the cell, and you can see there it's color coordinated, so you can see at a glance, have you typed in the right cell or have you mistyped? And as soon as I hit enter, there we've got our £200. Now, because it's referring to the cells, if I change the cell, the standard pay gets recalculated, which is what we want from Excel. We don't want to have to redo the calculation of any of the values that are being used to change. Now, I'm going to redo that. I could equally have clicked into the cell, so rather than type it in, I could say it's equals cell B4 multiplied by cell C4. So you can see when you click into the cell, it's uppercase. If you just type it in, it's not case sensitive, so you don't have to put in the uppercase. And we can see up here, in the formula bar, there's our formula, and we hit enter. Now what we want to do is we want to replicate that formula throughout this little table. Now we've only got a half a dozen salespeople in, so you could, if you wanted to, but I would strongly recommend you don't do it. You could simply type in the formula for Tara, type in the formula for Sue, etc. That's really labor intensive. If you had 600 or 6,000 entries in your table, that's not going to work. One of the strongest functions, I believe, in Excel is the next little option. While you're in the cell that contains the formula, which is our cell D4, you can see that there's a green border around the cell, and there's a little green square in the bottom right-hand corner. Now my cursor, you can see, is a white cross. If I place my cursor over the green square, it becomes a black cross. Now make sure it's a black cross and not a four-headed arrow, because a four-headed arrow just will end up moving the contents of the cell. What we want to do is replicate the contents of the cell. So if I place my mouse in the bottom right-hand corner, hold the left-hand mouse button down, and I drag that right down to the bottom and let go. And as if by magic, all my cells have been populated. And what has happened here is we've taken the original formula, which is B4 times C4, and we've replicated it into the next row. And because we've replicated, if you look into cell D5, it is now the formula B5 times C5. And we'll move down into the next cell, in cell D6, it's B6 times C6. And that is called relative referencing. And the term relative referencing means basically you've taken a formula, you've replicated it, and the cell that it makes reference to has changed relative to its position. So this is a very key and very important element of Excel, one of the most powerful elements, if you ask me. So what we're going to do now is go over and work out the overtime pay in exactly the same way. So we can see that Jane has worked 4 times overtime hours, and she gets £30 an hour for that. So we put in our formula again. It equals our overtime hours multiplied by our overtime rate. And we hit enter. We get £120. Once again, we can grab the bottom right-hand corner of that and drag it right down. And we can see that even though Sue hasn't worked any hours, it still carries out the calculation and it puts it in as 0. The way this is formatted, we could display this as a 0, but the formatting is for another day. It is still working out as 0, it's just displaying it as a dash. So now that we know how much their standard pay is, how much their overtime pay is, we can work out their total pay, which is simply cell D4 in Jane's case, plus G4, so it equals D4 plus G4, £360. And if we grab that and drag it down, we get their total. Now this total is dependent on these cells plus these cells. So if we change any of these 4 cells, our total pay will go up. So if Jane, for example, sorry, these cells. So if Jane does 15 hours and 5 hours, we can see her total pay updated accordingly. Okay. Now I'm going to move over to this little example here. And in our first example, we looked at just taking values from or adding values together, multiplying values and so on. And that's probably the most common example you would have for calculations. You can also do calculations on dates. A date, as far as Excel is concerned, is just a number. It's formatted as days, months, and years for our benefit. Excel's not interested in that. Excel just sees a date as a number. And that number represents how many days have elapsed from the 1st of January 1900. So as far as Excel is concerned, 2 dates, if you extract one date from the other, you'll get how many days are in between. So in example 2 here, I have a start date and an end date for a project. And what we want to do is work out how long the project's going to last. So our duration then is going to be equals, our equal sign once again, our end date, our furthest away date, which is cell M4, minus our start date, which is L4, and it tells us it's a duration of 28 days. It's just taken one date from the other. Once again, we can apply our relative referencing, and we drag that down, and we see how long each project is going to work. Now, in the same way as we can add numbers, we can add dates and numbers as well. So the review date for the project is 30 days after the end date. So what date is that? That's just simply going to be equal to the end date plus 30. And it tells us when that end date is. Likewise, another review date, 10 dates after 10 weeks after the end date. That's just the end date plus 70. So it's the end date plus 70. And then we work that out. Okay. And we can drag those down, applying our relative referencing, and it will work them out for us. So you can manipulate dates and calculations. You can have a look at one date, a deadline. You can look at today's date and compare the deadline and today's date and work out how many days you've got left for the deadline, or how many days over your deadline you've gone. So it's just a simple matter of subtracting or adding or whatever it might be. Okay. Example 3 here, in exactly the same way, you can add and subtract time. So in this example, we've got a couple of projects, start and finish, or tasks, or whatever they might be. So our duration is simply going to be the finish time minus the start time. That tells us 2 hours. Once again, with the relative referencing, we can drag that down. And we can see how long these all take. Okay, so I would imagine the most common type of example or calculation you'll be using would be example 1, possibly example 2, less likely example 3, but just be aware, calculations are not just for numbers. Okay. I'm going to move on to this little one. In this example, we've got our sales folk again. They have got salaries, and what we want to do is work out what their pension contribution is. So what we want to do is work out what is, if the pension contribution is going to be 5% or 10%, how much would that be? So our salary is £20,000. So in this case, once again, we're starting with the equal sign. We pick up Jane's salary and we multiply it by 5%. Now, if you're putting in 5%, you can certainly put it in a 0.05, which indicates 5%. And that tells us that 5% of 20,000 is 1,000. Or, let's redo that again. You can have it as the salary times 5%. Now, if you're going to use the full 5%, don't forget to put in the percentage sign, because if you don't put in the percentage sign, take that percentage sign out, what you'll end up doing is just multiplying your salary there by 5, and you're going to get a pension contribution of £100,000, which, if your company's paying it, brilliant, but if you're paying it, it just doesn't make sense. Likewise, in our calculation, if we want to replicate that for the other sales folk, we just drag it down. If it's 10%, it equals the salary multiplied by 10%, and we drag it down. Okay. And once again, because our calculations are based on the content of a cell, if that cell changes, if Jane is increased to 25,000, the calculations recalculate. And that's what you want. If you ever find yourself putting a calculation in and you're entering a value rather than a cell that contains a value, stop and have a think. Okay. And example 5 over here. So a little bit more complicated. We have got a budget. We've got the amount that we spent, and we want to know how much have we got left and what percentage have we spent. So our amount left is obviously going to be the budget amount minus the amount that we spent. So in this case, it's going to be equals our budget minus our spent. So that tells us we have £1,000 left. It's recalculated for all our departments. Well, what was the percentage spent? So we spent 9,000 out of the overall 10,000. So the percentage spent is equals our amount spent divided by our budget, 90%. And we can drag that down and it works them all out. Now, if we change anything, once again, it recalculates accordingly. Now, there's some simple examples of calculations, and we've introduced the equal sign, which gets us into calculation mode. We've added our standard pay and overtime pay. We have subtracted dates, time, and our budget amounts. We have used multiplication for our salaries, for our rates, etc., and we've used division to work out that calculation. We haven't done order. It's one that you wouldn't do very often. Now, in all these situations, you may or may not be aware that whatever you have typed into a cell will always appear up here at the top in the formula bar. So if you type in Jane, you can see it's up here in the formula bar. 15, it's up here in the formula bar. So if we go on to our calculation cell, the calculation is in the formula bar. So if you're not sure, if you're looking at a value and you think there might be a calculation and you're not too sure, have a look up in the formula bar and you'll be able to identify what that formula is. And if you think there's a mistake, you can just simply go in and make a change there. Now, I'm going to move on to the next little sheet. They've all been simple little calculations where you have been adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, etc. In this next example, multiple operators, we're going to do a calculation which has got a number of steps to it. So here, for example, we've got a number of items. We have got a cost price, a retail price, and a quantity. So we want to work out the profit. So the profit is obviously going to be our retail price minus our cost price times the quantity. So we're going to put that calculation in here in cell E4. And we're going to say our profit is equal to our retail price, our highest price, minus our cost price, multiplied by our quantity. Now, when we pick up those cells and we hit enter, we're expecting, because it's a very simple little calculation, 15 minus 10 gives us £5 profit per item. We sold 2, so we're expecting a profit of £10. But something has gone wrong here. I'm getting a -5. Why am I getting a -5? And if you don't spot that mistake and you replicate your formula, you're going to get the wrong answer for all of them. So what is going wrong here? Our little formula takes C4, it subtracts B4, and then multiplies it by D4. But we're reading left to right, and that makes sense to us, but that is not how Excel calculates, carries out a calculation where you've got more than one type of an operator. Here we've got a minus sign and a multiplication sign. Excel considers different operators to have different importances. So, for example, multiplication and division are considered to be of higher importance than addition and subtraction. So going left to right, Excel will look for the higher importance operators, like the multiplication or the division, and it will carry those out first, and then it will carry out the addition and subtraction, which is exactly what has happened here. We can see that Excel has looked left to right and it has seen this B4 times D4 and it goes, that's more important than the subtraction. I'm going to do this bit first. So it's multiplied B4, which is 15, it's multiplied B4, which is 10, by D4, which is 2, to give us 20. And then it's taking that 20 away from C4, which is 15, hence the -5. So if you are doing a calculation with different priority operators, you need to be aware of how Excel will do it, and you need to adapt your formula accordingly. This is where your brackets come in. Some of you may be aware of your brackets. So what we need to do is we need to start introducing brackets, because brackets take higher priority than anything else. So in this case, what we actually want to do is take B4 from C4 first, and then multiply the whole result by B4. So what we need to do is we need to go up to our formula bar, and we need to wrap our first little element of the calculation in brackets. So now looking left to right, Excel will carry out the bracket at the first, C4, which is 15, minus B4, which is 10, to give us a 5, and then multiply that by the 2. And there we can see our calculation is correct. So if we drag that down, we now get the right answer. So we've got C4 minus D4 times D4, because we're in row 4. We've replicated the formula, we've applied our relative referencing, and it has changed all the cells to C5, D5, D5, etc., because we're in row 5. Moving on down, it's changed all the cell references to row 6, row 7, row 8, etc. Now, just as a matter of interest, you may remember this from school, BODMAS. BODMAS is the acronym that we use to describe how Excel carries out its calculations. So we'll do anything in brackets first. Then it will calculate anything in raised to the power. So if we had our squared or cubed or anything like that. Then it will do division. Then it will carry out the multiplication. Then it will do addition. And then it will do subtraction. And that is the order in which Excel will carry out its calculations. Now, division and multiplication, it doesn't matter if you divide something and then multiply something, or if you add something and then subtract something. So division and multiplication, doesn't matter which one happens first. Likewise for addition and subtraction. But this is the order in which Excel will work through its calculations. So it's really, really important that you have your brackets in the right place, so that you have the correct calculation in there. Now, obviously, if you haven't got the correct calculation and you don't spot it, or you don't recognize it, or you are just unaware that the minus sign is a problem, then unfortunately, Excel can't help you. But you need to understand the rules. So that is where we've got multiple operators. So we could, of course, have worked out the profit per item first and then multiplied it by quantity, but that would involve an extra column. Here we're doing it all in one go. Example 2 then over here. What we want to do is work out the total cost of the item that we're hiring. So we're hiring it one date, we're returning it in another date, and we're paying £60 per day. So in that case, it's going to be the return date minus the hire date to work out how many days there are in between. And we're going to multiply that by the amount the amount per day. But of course, we need to make sure that we do the number of days calculation first. So we need to go up and wrap that element of the calculation in brackets. So it does that bit first, it works out the days first. Otherwise, you're going to end up having a day minus 60 times another day. And then we get our calculation correct. And this one again, we've got a total spent, we've got a budget, so we want to work out the percentage of the budget remaining. Previously, we worked out how much was left and worked out the budget remaining after that. Here we're going to do it all in one go. So it's going to be equal to the budgeted amount minus the total spend over the budgeted amount. But don't forget, we need to put brackets around the first bit of it to make sure that happens first. And then you can see very little in the first two, etc. This is a very, very important thing to take away from today. So our first little example looked at individual calculations. Our second involved doing multiple calculations in one go. Now, here we have all our sales team, and we have a total sales figure for each individual, and we want to work out what the commission is. Now, we could just work it out. We can see there's the commission rate of 10%. So we can calculate for Jane the commission, which is going to be equal to the total sales multiplied by 10%. B1 is telling us it's 10%, so we could put it in there and type in 10% and hit enter, and that tells us 790. And we can take the bottom right hand corner of that cell and we can drag it down for everybody. There's nothing strange or startling, nothing that we haven't done before. But the problem there is it's a very inefficient way of using Excel. We want to make our spreadsheets as efficient and accurate and professional as possible. So in this case, although we've set our commission rate up here is 10%, if we change it to 20% or 5%, that has no reflection, it has no consequences to our commission here. So typing, as I said before, the value into the calculation in this case is not a very good idea. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to change it. So instead of saying it's C4 times 10%, I'm going to actually pick up the 10% from cell B1. So in this case, we're going to work out the commission, which is C4 times B1. And we get 790. And the beauty here is that if we change our commission rate to 20%, the commission gets recalculated. If we change our commission rate to 5%, the commission gets recalculated and back to 10%. So brilliant. I've worked out my commission for Jane. I want to replicate that for everybody else. So in the same way as we did before, you place your cell, you pick up your cell, you grab the bottom right hand corner of that cell and you drag it down to the bottom. And what on earth has gone on? Something is not right. What has happened is Excel has done exactly what we told it to do, but as you can see, what we told it to do wasn't correct. Let's have a little investigation to see how we have ended up with what we have. We started off with C4 times B1. So for Jane, we took C4, which is our total sales, and we multiplied it by B1, which is our commission rate. We took that formula and we moved it down and replicated it into cell D5. And if we have a look at the value in D5, we can see the C4 became C5. Perfect. So we picked up Harry's sales. But our B1, our commission rate, has moved down to B2. So it's actually picking up B2. So what has happened here is our relative referencing. And if you remember from the previous examples, relative referencing, when it replicates a formula, it also changes the cell reference. So it's done exactly what we told it to do, but what we told it to do was wrong. And it's perpetrated this error. So it's taken that formula and it's applied relative referencing down into row 6. So it's taken C4, it's changed it to C5, it's changed it to C6, which is fine. But it's taken B1 and it's changed it to B2 and B3. So it's actually picking up B3, which is the word name. So it's multiplying Sue's sales by the word name. Can't multiply numbers by text, so it doesn't know what to do. So with Excel complains and said, I can't work out this value. And it's replicated that problem the whole way down. So the relative referencing will not work in this example. So I'm going to undo that problem. And I'm going to go back to the original, which we know is okay for Jane, but what do we need to do to make it okay for Harry, Sue, Peter, George, etc.? Well, we can see that the formula up above, the C4 element of it was okay because we want C4 to change to C5, C6, C7, so we can leave that. But the B1 element was changing as well to B2, B3, B4, which is not what we want. So what we want to do is to do something with the B1 element of the formula so that the B1 does not change. And what we do is we go up to the formula, up on the formula bar, and we place a $sign, which has got nothing to do with currency. I can see there's a question about currency signs, which I'll pick up at the end here. The $sign is just a notation a syntax that Excel uses. So what we do is we put a $ in front of each element of the cell that we don't want to change. So we put a $ in front of the B, and that means don't allow this element of the cell, which is the column element of the cell, to change as we move the formula. And we put a $ in front of the 1. So this now says, the way this is read is C4 can change, but B1 cannot change. And we'll hit enter. If I take that formula and drag it down, we get the right answers. So our C4 times B1, when it was replicated, it became C5 times B1, C6 times B1, C7 times B1. The B1 has not changed, it's been locked in. And now, if we change our commission rate, our commissions are totally recalculated. Once again, recalculated, etc. Moving over, you'll probably find that in most cases in your spreadsheets that you're working with, you've probably got loads and loads of data. So in most cases, your tables of data will probably be in a vertical notation. But you may have tables that are presented horizontally across your sheet, but it's exactly the same principle. So if you're going across the sheet as we are here, our commission is going to be equal to change total sales multiplied by the commission rate, which we have up in B1. And if we drag this across, we'll apply relative referencing and we'll get the wrong answers because we'll have G4 times B1. B1 is our 20%. When we moved that over into Harry, it became H4, which is fine. We've just moved into another column. So the H4 has the G4 has become H4, but the B1 has become C1, and there's nothing in cell C1, so it's actually miscalculating. Likewise, for Sue, the G4 has become I4, and for Peter, the G4 has become J4, but the B1 has become C1, D1, and E1, which is not correct. So once again, we need to go back to the original and lock down our cell references. And there it all works out perfectly. Now a little note on our absolute referencing. If you don't have any $signs, that's relative referencing, and that opens up the cell that when you replicate the formula, the column element of the cell and the row element of the cell can change. If you've got $signs around each element, that's called absolute referencing, because we're taking the cell and we're using it absolutely. It will not change. So we've got a $sign in front of the B, and we've got a $sign in front of the 1, a $sign in front of the column element, and a $sign in front of the row element. In this case, we actually didn't need the $sign in front of the B, because we were never leaving this column. We were always in the B column. We were never replicating the formula left or right. So the $sign in front of the B, while not incorrect, it wasn't essential. We didn't actually need it. So we could have just said B$1. And there may be instances where you do want the column to change or the row to change and not the other element. So you need to have a look at your situation. Likewise here, we're never moving out of row 5. So the row element doesn't have to be fixed, but the column element does. So we could have used $B1 instead of a dollar around each element. And in these two situations, we've used a mix of absolute and relative, and these are called mixed references. So there are actually 4 in total. There's relative referencing, which has got no dollars in it, absolute referencing, which has got a dollar against both elements, and then the mixed, which has got a dollar against one or other of them. So in your situation, whatever situation you're in, will dictate what you're going to use. But of course, as I said before, once you put your calculations in, you need to be able to look at the result of that calculation and identify, yes, that's the correct answer, or no, it's not the correct answer. I need to go in and fix it. now. There's an alternative. In this example, we put in absolute referencing to lock down a cell. There's an alternative to putting in absolute referencing, which is called naming cells, which is a little bit more advanced, but I'll very quickly mention it. Rather than pick up cell B1, what we can do is we can name B1. We can call that cell commission rate. And if we call it commission rate, then we can do our calculation based on the name of the cell. So we can see that sitting in cell B1, here is the name box, which everybody misses. People just don't see this at all. And we can give this cell a name by just simply clicking into the name box and typing in the name that we want to give this cell. And I'm going to call it commission rate. I'll just call it com_rate. There's a couple of things about naming cells. Cell names don't like spaces, so if you're going to call it com rate, you need to put an underscore or something underneath it. There's other characters it doesn't like, but Excel will warn you. Now, once you type that in, we need to hit the enter key on the keyboard to lock that name in there. If you just click out, you haven't saved the name. So you need to go in there, type in the name, and hit enter to keep the name in place. So there we can see we put the name cell. Now, if you're anywhere else on your spreadsheet and you want to find a named cell, you click on the arrow to the right and go to com rate, and it will take us to that cell. This time, when we're working out our commission, we can say it's equals our total sales multiplied by cell B1. But now when we click into B1, you can see it's not included the cell B1 into our calculation. It's picked up the name of the cell, com rate. And now, when I drag that down, there's no need for our absolute referencing because it's picked up com rate, com rate, com rate the whole way down. If I had carried out my calculation and I typed in C4 multiplied by B1, it won't pick up the name rate. It'll only pick up the name of the cell if you click into the cell. And now you can see it's picked it up. So you don't have to worry about absolute referencing. Likewise here, I can say it's Jane's total sales times the name cell, and it all works out. So there's no need for our absolute referencing. Okay, so just to demonstrate that in the both using both absolute and relative, here we have Joe. He's worked a number of hours. The hourly rate is 60. We want to work out what his total fee would be using absolute and his total fee using the named cell. So if we're going to use absolute referencing, we would say it's his hours worked times his cell D1, but we need to put in our dollars to lock it in place. Using the named cell, we don't need to put in absolute referencing, but we do need to name the cell. So name the cell, we'll just call it rate. And then we can say it's equals hours worked. Same answers. Okay, so it's up to you to decide which one you're more comfortable with or is more relevant for you.
Thanks, Louise. We hope you enjoyed this introduction to calculations on Microsoft Excel. Look out for our other webinars on our YouTube channel. We hope to see you again soon.